At 69, I thought I'd seen every kind of loss a man could face. Then the DNA test arrived. 2 of my kids, gone from my bloodline in a single email. My wife said it was just a mistake. The lab said otherwise. My name is Harold Benton. I'm 69 years old, a retired civil engineer who thought he'd built a steady life out of blueprints and promises, until one email showed me how easily both can collapse. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that usually began with black coffee and crossword puzzles. The house was still, and the sun through the curtains had that faint winter gold tone Diane always loved. I was halfway through my second cup when I heard the computer chime. The subject line read, "Your ancestry DNA results are ready." I clicked without thinking. It had been a project for fun, something to keep me occupied since retiring from the engineering firm. I wanted to build a family tree, something my grandchildren could add to. But when I saw the screen, my breath stopped short. The colored bars were wrong. Greg and Melissa, 2 of my children, weren't listed under my genetic profile. Only Thomas, my eldest, matched as biological child. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I adjusted my glasses, scrolled, refreshed the page. Then I read the line again. No genetic relation detected with participants, Greg Benton and Melissa Benton. I just stared. It was like the screen was whispering something I couldn't let myself hear. The kettle started to whistle. I didn't move to stop it. When Diane came in from her morning walk, she saw my face before I could hide it. "Harold? What's wrong?" I turned the laptop toward her. She leaned down, squinted, then forced a small laugh. "Oh, these things make mistakes all the time. Don't let it get in your head." Her tone was too even. "It says they're not mine," I said quietly. She reached for my hand, but her grip felt rehearsed. "It's probably a data error. We'll check again." But I'd been an engineer all my life. I knew when data failed and when someone was lying. I nodded, pretending to accept it, and closed the lid of the laptop. The kettle had gone silent by then, the water long boiled off. The air smelled faintly scorched. Diane smiled once more, too wide. "I'll make breakfast." "Sure," I said, but my voice didn't sound like my own. As she moved around the kitchen, humming something under her breath, I stared at the closed computer. The hum sounded wrong, off-key, unfamiliar. I already knew what I'd do next. The lab might have made a mistake, but I wanted to hear that from them, not from her. I reached for the phone, already knowing which number to dial. The representative on the other end spoke with a soft, practiced voice. She called me sir 4 times in 1 minute. I could hear typing in the background, the kind of clicking that fills every silence when the truth is about to arrive. "Yes, Mr. Benton," she said finally. "I've reviewed your report. There's no processing error. The samples were cross-verified. The profiles for Greg and Melissa are not biological matches. The word not felt heavier than the rest." I tried to sound calm. "You're certain?" "Yes, sir." Triple verification. Standard protocol. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could betray me. The refrigerator hummed behind me, a low, constant sound like a held breath. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain pattern until my eyes blurred. 2 of my children I'd raised, disciplined, comforted, taught to ride bikes, were strangers in blood. When Diane came back from watering her plants, she looked at me carefully. "You called, didn't you?" I nodded. "They confirmed it." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't cry. "That's impossible." "It's not." She turned away, fussed with a stack of mail, then said, "Maybe the kids sent the wrong samples. You know how careless they can be?" I didn't answer. I knew she wanted noise, to drown out the truth. I got up and walked past her, down the hall to my study. The room smelled faintly of old paper and cedar oil. On the shelf sat a picture of our wedding day, her hair shining in the summer light, her hand on my arm. I took it down and studied her face. It looked honest back then. I placed the photo back on the shelf but turned it toward the wall. I didn't know what I felt. Betrayal, yes, but also stupidity. I'd spent my life believing that honesty built strong foundations. Maybe I'd built ours on sand. I shut off the lights in the study, leaving the room darker than before. I could already feel the truth moving through the walls like cold air. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to Diane's breathing beside me, too steady, too deep for someone innocent. Every exhale felt like a lie whispered into the dark. My mind went backward through the years, stitching together the moments I'd ignored. There was the Christmas in 1983 when she claimed a work emergency had kept her late. The company she worked for didn't operate on holidays. There was the weekend trip she said was a team retreat. She'd come home sunburned in places a conference room couldn't reach. And then there was Richard Danner, the coworker I'd never liked. He had that smooth kind of confidence men use when they've gotten away with something once and plan to do it again. I remembered how his name used to come up in passing. "Richard says we should visit the lake sometime," she'd say. Or, "Richard knows a great restaurant in town." I hadn't thought much of it then. People worked together, people had friends, but sometimes memory grows teeth. Around midnight I got up and went to the kitchen. The moonlight touched the floor in silver squares. I poured a glass of water and stared out the window. The yard looked calm, but I felt the foundation under me shift. I tried to recall anything that might have explained the timing of our kids' births, but the calendar blurred. I only knew that each of those early years had carried some excuse, some absence I'd forgiven too easily. The refrigerator light glowed faintly as I reached in for the water pitcher. For a moment I caught my reflection in the glass door, older, thinner, and suddenly unfamiliar. Maybe that's what betrayal does. It doesn't just steal love, it steals the version of yourself that believed in it. I set the glass down without drinking. I decided to focus on the truth. I decided that I'd stop remembering and start confirming. By dinner the next evening, I had printed the report. One sheet of paper, plain text, no explanations needed. Diane roasted chicken, same as always. The smell filled the house like routine trying to disguise itself as peace. But the peace was gone. I waited until she sat down, then I placed the printout beside her plate. She glanced at it, her fork pausing midair. "What's this?" I didn't answer. I just watched her eyes track the numbers. The silence between us thickened until I could hear the wall clock in the living room marking each second that used to belong to us. Her face didn't crumble. Diane had always been composed, too composed. A lifetime of keeping surfaces polished while the foundation cracked beneath them. She set the paper down, her hand resting on it like she could crush the truth with weight alone. "You're really letting this nonsense bother you?" My throat tightened, but my voice came out calm. "It's not nonsense." Her gaze flicked toward the window anywhere but at me. "You don't know what you're talking about." That was all she could muster. No denial, no apology, just distance. I looked at the woman I'd shared 40 years of mornings with and saw the small betrayals behind every gesture. The way she'd kept her phone face down, the late nights at work, the sudden mood swings when I mentioned the kids. All of it was right there in the hollow of her neck, in the stillness of her shoulders. The chair creaked when I leaned back. My heart didn't feel broken anymore, just tired of being fooled. I had spent my life building things that lasted, bridges, towers, homes strong enough to resist time and weather. But I'd built my family on trust, and trust had no steel in it. I took the report from the table and folded it once, clean and sharp. My hands didn't shake this time. "I'll find out," I said. Diane's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Maybe she understood that the man sitting across from her wasn't the one she'd managed for years. I slipped the folded paper into my jacket pocket and stood. The air felt heavy, not with grief anymore, but with purpose. Outside, the night waited, cold, steady, honest. I walked out and closed the door behind me. The first test had shown me the truth. The next one would make it undeniable. When I delivered that second DNA test, I knew my life was about to split in two. before the truth, and after it. This is where everything changes. The moment a quiet old man stops being a victim and starts turning his own family's lies into evidence. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I did the first steps quietly. 2 toothbrushes from the bathroom, sealed in small plastic bags, labeled by hand. I took one of my own, too. I didn't want Diane asking questions, and I wasn't ready for her answers. The next morning, I drove across town to a different lab. No online kits, no shared databases, no chance of tampering. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been left too long on a burner. The young woman behind the desk took the samples, printed a receipt, and told me I'd get results in 5 days. 5 days. After so many years of believing my family was mine, I was counting truth in business days. I didn't tell anyone, not Thomas, not even Samuel, my lawyer and oldest friend. I kept my voice steady around Diane, but I could feel her watching me. Her smiles had grown thinner, her words lighter, her eyes calculating every move I made. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Phone calls that ended when I entered the room. Texts she deleted too fast. A stack of mail from banks I didn't recognize. All small things, but small things add up. In engineering, one loose bolt can take down a bridge. Marriage isn't much different. I spent those 5 days pretending to be the same man she'd always known, making coffee, watching the evening news, taking my morning walks. But inside, something new had taken root. Determination, cold and steady. On the 5th day, the email arrived while Diane was out grocery shopping. I opened it at the kitchen counter. The report said exactly what I expected and exactly what I dreaded. Greg and Melissa weren't mine. The lab confirmed it twice. Different equipment, different staff. It didn't feel like a punch this time. It felt like a door closing. I printed the results, slipped them into the folder with the first test, and wrote the date on the corner in my old engineer's handwriting. Then I made another decision. If Diane could rewrite the truth about blood, I could rewrite the future of everything else. I reached for my phone and dialed Samuel Hart's number. Samuel still worked in the same small office he'd had since the 80s. Wood paneling, leather chairs, a faint smell of pipe tobacco he hadn't smoked in 10 years. He looked up from his desk when I walked in and saw my face. "You found something," he said. I handed him the folder. He read the top pages without speaking, then sat back. "You want to press charges?" "No," I said. "I want control." He nodded slowly, the way a man does when he's building a plan while you're still speaking. "You've got assets, property, retirement accounts, the house. What do you want to happen with them?" "I want them safe. I want what I built to go to the right hands." He leaned forward. "You're thinking about a new will." "I'm thinking about a clean slate," I said. Samuel smiled faintly. "That's what paper is for." We spent 2 hours going over documents. My handwriting filled the margins. Every number, every line of ownership, checked and verified. I made sure nothing connected to Diane, not a joint account, not a shared title. When we were done, Samuel looked at me with quiet respect. "You're calm," he said. "I thought you'd be angry." "I was," I told him. "But anger burns out. This doesn't." He closed the folder and slid it back toward me. "You can't rewrite blood, Harold." "No," I said. "But I can decide who profits from it." When I left his office, the sun was already dropping behind the courthouse across the street. I stood for a moment on the steps, feeling the cold air move through my coat. Everything I had built, 40 years of work, saving, planning, was now a tool. I'd use it the way Diane used her lies. Carefully, effectively, without warning. Greg's 40th birthday looked like something from a magazine spread. Modern lights, polished glasses, and guests who smiled too long. Diane had spent the week helping with arrangements, which I now understood meant financing them. I parked on the street outside his house. Through the window, I could already see silhouettes moving, hear laughter that didn't sound quite natural. When I walked in, all heads turned at once, and for a moment I felt like an outsider stepping into a play that had started before I arrived. "Dad!" Greg called, too loud, too cheerful. His smile was broad, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You made it." "I always do," I said. Melissa appeared behind him, perfume sharp enough to sting. "Look at you," she said, brushing a non-existent speck from my jacket. "You clean up nice." Her tone carried a practiced warmth, the kind she used when asking for money years ago. Diane hovered near the kitchen island, holding a wine glass in both hands like it was a shield. She didn't meet my eyes. They'd set a place for me at the end of the long table, slightly apart, close enough to see, but not to belong. I didn't argue. A man can tell when he's being watched, and I could feel all three of them measuring me, weighing how much I knew. Greg was the one who slipped first. He poured drinks and leaned against the counter, pretending casual conversation. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Mom mentioned you've been busy lately." "Some new hobby?" His voice had that lazy drawl he used when he already knew the answer. "Something like that," I said. He smirked, sipped his whiskey, and looked away too quickly. Melissa laughed at something that hadn't been said. Dinner was a blur of polite talk and false nostalgia. They spoke about vacations, about investments, about a future that apparently didn't include me. When I mentioned Thomas, they changed the subject. When I asked about their work, Diane filled the silence for them, as if protecting their stories from cracks. The food was good. Diane's recipes always were, but it tasted like strategy. I could see the glances they traded when they thought I wasn't looking. Melissa checking her phone under the table, Greg whispering something into Diane's ear, her nod too subtle to notice unless you were searching for it. They were hiding something. Maybe not the DNA, not directly, but something built around it. A plan, half-born, waiting for my cooperation. Maybe they thought the old man wouldn't live long enough to notice. When the cake came out, everyone sang off key. Diane stood beside Greg, hand on his shoulder, smiling like the world hadn't shifted beneath us. I raised my glass. "To family," I said. My voice carried just enough weight to draw their attention. To knowing where we come from, and who we really are. The air stilled. Diane's glass trembled, spilling a drop of red wine onto her blouse. Greg's smile froze for half a heartbeat before he forced it back. Melissa laughed too fast, a little too loud. They recovered, but I saw it, the flicker of alarm that passed between them. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed each of them an envelope, plain white. "Something for the future," I said. Greg tore his open immediately. Melissa hesitated, then followed. Each one contained a typed letter, short, polite, and vague. I'd written them that morning. Greg looked up. "What's this?" "Just a note," I said. "You'll understand when the time comes." He tried to hide it, but I caught the way his jaw tightened, like a man realizing the conversation wasn't going the way he'd planned. Dinner ended not long after. They all thanked me, kissed my cheek, and called me sweet. But their voices carried the tension of actors reciting lines. As I walked to my car, I could see them through the window. 3 silhouettes leaning close, whispering. Diane's hand on Greg's arm. Melissa shaking her head. They didn't wave goodbye this time. I drove home with the music off, and in the rearview mirror, I could swear I saw Greg standing by the window, watching until my taillights disappeared. I didn't drive straight home after the dinner. The house felt like a place I needed distance from, and my own thoughts were too loud to carry there yet. I stopped at the small grocery store near Maple Street, the one with flickering lights and quiet aisles after 9. I walked through slowly, pretending to shop. I picked up a loaf of bread I didn't need, a carton of milk, and a small pack of instant soup. I wasn't hungry, but standing under that dull fluorescent light felt easier than sitting across from Diane's new face. When I finally pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. The porch light was on, waiting like nothing had changed. But everything had. I sat in the car a full minute before getting out, the groceries cooling on the passenger seat, and told myself I'd go inside calm, quiet, and clear-minded. Because from here on, every move mattered. Diane pretended to be asleep, but I heard her phone vibrate once on the nightstand before she rolled over and silenced it. I waited until her breathing steadied before getting up. In the study, the old albums waited on the shelf where they'd been for decades. Dusty leather spines, thick with years of memories. I brought them to the desk, turned on the small lamp, and started flipping through pages. Every smile looked rehearsed now. Every birthday candle, every Christmas tree, felt staged for the camera. Halfway through the third album, I found it. A single photograph tucked behind a page of Melissa's baby pictures. It wasn't in a sleeve like the others. It had been slipped loose, half hidden. Diane stood in the photo holding baby Melissa, laughing at someone just out of frame. Then I saw him, Richard Danner, arm around her waist, his hand resting where mine never had. He looked younger, confident, at home. On the back, in Diane's handwriting, Lake Trip 87. I stared until my vision blurred. The lake trip she'd told me about that year. She'd claimed it was a company event I'd been too busy to attend. I remembered her tan, the lightness in her mood when she came home. I had believed every word. I laid the photo on the desk beside the DNA results, proof in paper and ink. As I sat there, the sound of Diane's footsteps moved faintly above me. For a moment, I wondered if she'd come downstairs. But she didn't. Maybe she already knew what I'd find, and silence was her last defense. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil. My hands felt steady. I slipped the photo into the folder, sealed it with a clip, and wrote a note on the cover. For Samuel. The picture changed everything. The DNA told me the facts. The photo told me the story. Now, I could see it clearly. They'd all known. Greg's guarded smile, Melissa's sudden distance, Diane's constant hovering. Richard Danner wasn't a forgotten name. He was the missing link in a secret they'd shared for decades. I sat back, the leather chair creaking under my weight. The air in the house felt thinner, sharper. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't disbelief. It was preparation. Everything they'd taken from me, my name, my trust, my peace, would be measured, documented, and returned in kind. I reached for the folder again and whispered, "You wanted my legacy. Now you'll have to fight for it." The next morning, I laid everything out on my desk. The DNA reports, the photograph, the letters I'd given the kids. The folder looked thin, but it held a lifetime of evidence. I brewed coffee and watched the first light hit the garden. Diane's flowers were dying at the edges. She hadn't noticed, or she didn't care anymore. I called Samuel and told him to meet me at the house. He came by that afternoon, briefcase in hand, same quiet steadiness as always. He didn't ask many questions, just looked at what I showed him. "This is enough," he said finally. "Enough for what?" I asked. "For you to make decisions." That's all he said, but it was all I needed. We sat together at the table and went through my estate plan. Nothing complicated, just rearranging what already belonged to me. I changed ownership on the property, transferred accounts to my name only, and redrafted a clause in the will that separated biological heirs from dependents. Simple, clean, logical. The work kept my mind steady. Each signature felt like another brick in a wall between their greed and my peace. Samuel watched me sign the last page. "You sure you're ready for what this brings?" "I was born ready for work like this," I said. When he left, I stayed at the table for a long time. The smell of coffee had gone stale. I thought about the years behind me, the house I'd built, the bills I'd paid, the trust I'd given freely. I thought about how easily love turns into currency when people stop respecting where it came from. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. Diane came home late. I could tell she'd been somewhere expensive. Perfume, fresh makeup, the faint smell of wine. She tried to act casual, asking about dinner, about the weather. I let her. While she spoke, I looked at her hands. No ring tonight. That told me more than any confession. 2 days later, I met Diane in the garden. She was trimming dead leaves from the hydrangeas, pretending not to notice me. The late afternoon sun caught the edge of her hair, but she didn't look beautiful anymore. She looked careful. I stood a few feet away, folder in hand. She didn't turn. "I called Richard," I said. The shears froze midair. "What?" I said I called him. It wasn't true yet, but she didn't know that. Her hand dropped slowly to her side. "You didn't." "I did," I said. "He told me enough." The air between us thickened. She finally faced me, eyes wide, calculating how much I knew. "You can't ruin their lives over this," she said. Her voice cracked on their "not our, not mine." "They're grown," I said, "and they made choices. Same as you." She took a small step forward. "Harold, think about what you're doing. They're your children." "They were," I said quietly, until the truth came back with a barcode and a timestamp. For a moment she looked like she might break. Then her face hardened again. "You wouldn't dare go public." "You'd destroy the family name. I built that name," I said. "And I'll decide what it's worth." We stared at each other for a long time. Then she turned away, her shoulders shaking, not with tears, but with rage she couldn't show. I left her there with the flowers. When I got inside, I called Samuel and told him to prepare the next step. I didn't tell him what had just happened. I didn't need to. That night, Diane didn't come to bed. I heard her pacing downstairs, the click of her phone keys echoing through the quiet. Maybe she was calling Greg, or Melissa, or Richard. Maybe all three. It didn't matter anymore. I knew what was coming. I saw everything I needed to see, and I was ready. The plan wasn't an idea anymore. It was a deadline. You would not believe how far the situation is about to get. It was a clear Saturday morning, cold and dry, the kind that makes everything sound sharper. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and laid out the folder on the table one last time. The papers inside didn't feel heavy anymore. They just felt final. I invited all three children for a family meeting. No excuses this time. Everyone came. Diane came first, quiet and slow, pretending calm but unable to hide the stiffness in her hands. Then Greg, loud and confident, his new truck parked diagonally in the driveway like it owned the place. Melissa followed, perfume too sweet, her expression too controlled. Thomas was last, my oldest, the only one who hadn't been born under a lie. He arrived with a kind of wary respect, unsure why I'd called everyone together. His eyes searched mine for a hint. I gave him none. We sat around the dining table, the same one that had seen holidays, arguments, and late-night laughter. But the air was different now. Heavy, alert. I didn't start with greetings, just reached into the folder and placed the contents on the table. 2 DNA reports, the photograph, a few statements, and one handwritten note. The truth, laid out like tools on a workbench. Melissa's brow creased. "What's all this supposed to mean?" Greg leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You've been busy, old man." Thomas looked from one to the other, uneasy. "Dad?" I nodded toward the papers. "It's time everyone told the truth." No one moved. Then Greg gave a short laugh, too loud for the silence around us. "Guess you finally caught up." I studied him. "Caught up?" He didn't flinch. "Mom told us. Years ago my stomach dropped. You knew." "Since I was 16, he said. "Melissa found out a little later. She cried about it for a week until Mom explained that it didn't change anything. You'd keep the roof over our heads." "And you did," Melissa spoke then. Voice soft, like she thought softness could make the words hurt less. She said you'd already made your choice. To stay. She said you needed us as much as we needed you. Diane stared at the table, her face pale. Thomas shifted in his seat, shock clear in his eyes. You knew? He whispered. All this time? Greg turned to him. Don't look so surprised. You're his real son. You wouldn't understand. I watched Thomas recoil, his jaw tightening. He looked at me with something like guilt, but it wasn't his to carry. You've been mocking me, I said quietly. All of you. Pretending, smiling, using what I built for you. Greg shrugged. You can't blame us for taking advantage of what's offered. You needed a family. We played along. Everyone got something. That was the moment the calm inside me solidified into something else. Colder, harder, more certain. I looked at Thomas. Did you know? He shook his head. Never. I swear it, I believed him. Of course I did. He'd inherited my mother's eyes, steady, unpretending. Then you're the only one who still carries my name with meaning, I said. Melissa's lip trembled. You're not going to punish us for this, are you? We didn't choose how it started. No, I said. But you chose how it continued. Diane finally spoke. Harold, stop this before it goes too far. It already has, I said. You stole the truth and sold it for comfort. Greg leaned forward, anger overtaking his charm. You think cutting us out will make you the victim? You were the fool in this, not us. The world owes you nothing. I don't want the world, I said. Just what's mine. The silence that followed was heavy and perfect. Thomas sat still, watching, understanding something the others never would, that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was reclamation. I gathered the papers, closed the folder, and stood. Some of you came from me in name, not in blood. You took what wasn't yours. You laughed behind my back. But I want you to remember something. You'll never take my integrity. It built this house, this life, and it'll bury the lies you lived on. No one tried to stop me as I walked out. Not even Thomas, though I saw him watching, silent, with a kind of sad respect. He knew what I'd just done, and he didn't know yet what I'm about to do, and how much it would shock everybody. The next week felt like slow thunder, quiet on the surface, heavy underneath. I didn't shout, didn't slam doors. I worked. I started in my study, sorting papers, checking files, redrafting signatures. Samuel came by twice, and both times he looked at me the way a man does when he sees a storm coming but knows better than to run from it. Diane didn't speak much after the meeting. She stayed in the guest house, curtains drawn. Once, I saw Greg's truck in the driveway, then gone again within minutes. They were scrambling. That was fine. I'd already won. Each day had its task. Monday, I changed the accounts. Tuesday, I transferred the property titles. Wednesday, I canceled the insurance policies that listed their names. Thursday, I replaced every key in the house. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. I spent my afternoons fixing things I'd neglected. The loose railing on the porch, the broken hinge on the gate, the peeling paint on the window frame. My hands remembered the rhythm of work. Each nail I drove in steadied something inside me. The neighbors waved as they passed, probably thinking I was just another old man tinkering to pass the time. They didn't know the work was a purge. In the evenings, I'd sit in the quiet, the air smelling of sawdust and new varnish. I'd look around at the walls I'd built, the floors I'd laid, the home that had held so many lies, and now felt honest again. Diane came once to the main house to collect the rest of her clothes. She looked around, saw the fresh paint, the new locks. "You really think this makes you right?" she asked. "No," I said. "It makes me clean." She didn't argue. She just left. By the end of the week, everything that tied them to me was gone. The accounts, the access, the trust. What remained was mine. Earned, protected, uncorrupted. When Samuel called to confirm the final paperwork, I thanked him. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'll build again," I said. After the call, I walked out to the porch. The air had that crisp smell that comes before rain. The garden looked emptier without Diane's flowers, but I didn't mind. It looked real. I thought of Greg's smug grin, Melissa's averted eyes, Diane's cold calm, and felt no rage left, just distance. I poured myself a small drink, sat back, and watched the sky darken. Let them keep their secrets and their other father's name. Let them live in the comfort they thought they'd earned. I had truth now, and the truth was mine to live with. The park hadn't changed much in 40 years. Same crooked oak trees, same pond with the rusted railing where ducks used to gather. I hadn't been there in years, not since before Diane and I were married. Back then, she'd met me here after work, when her laughter still sounded genuine, and I believed that sound meant love. Now the air was quiet except for the wind. The bench where we'd first talked was still there, the paint chipped and gray. I sat down slowly, feeling the wood creak under my weight. For the first time in weeks, I let myself stop moving. No papers, no signatures, no plans, just stillness. I thought about Greg and Melissa. How easily they'd twisted the years into convenience. How little I must have mattered beyond a wallet and a last name. The realization didn't sting anymore. It just sat there, dull and solid, like an old bruise that had finally stopped bleeding. I also thought about Thomas, the way his eyes had filled with shock and shame when he learned the truth. He hadn't known, and somehow that made the betrayal sharper. He had grown up believing in the same family I had. A couple walked past holding hands, talking softly. The woman laughed, and for a second I heard Diane's voice from decades ago. I almost smiled at the memory before it curdled. Time plays cruel tricks like that. It lets you remember the sound but not the meaning. I looked at my hands, the skin rough and marked from years of building things. I had built everything. Houses, bridges, a reputation, and thought love could be built the same way, step by step, steady and honest. But love built on lies never stands. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled across the path. I reached into my coat pocket and found an old photograph of me and the 3 kids fishing by the lake. Thomas was about 10, Greg and Melissa still small. Diane had taken that photo. I turned it over and wrote one line on the back. Never again built on trust alone. Then I tore it in half and let the pieces drift into the pond. Watching the paper sink, I realized it was no longer a time for mourning anymore. I was clearing ground for something new. Thomas came by that evening without calling. He stood at the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner downtown. He looked tired but calm, the kind of tired that comes from understanding more than you ever wanted to. We sat on the porch, no small talk. The quiet between us was easy, the kind only men who have worked hard all their lives know. He was the first to speak. "I don't know what to say that makes it better." "You don't have to," I said. "You didn't break anything." He nodded. "Greg called me. He says you're cutting them out for good." "I'm not cutting anyone out," I said. "I'm just closing the books." He stared at his cup, steam curling in the cool air. "They're lost, Dad. They don't even realize what they've done." "They do," I said quietly. "They just don't care." "That's worse," Thomas sighed. "I always thought Mom was complicated. But this?" "She's more than complicated," I said. "She's a stranger now." For a while we just sat there, listening to the wind move through the yard. Finally he asked, "What are you going to do now?" "I'll live," I said. "Simpler this time, smaller. I might sell this place, move closer to the lake, somewhere quiet. I've had enough noise for one lifetime." He looked at me then, the way a son looks when he's measuring what kind of man his father still is. "If you go, let me help you pack." "You have your own life to build," I said. He shook his head. "Maybe. But I don't want to build it the way they did. I want something real. That line stayed with me. Something real. I put my hand on his shoulder. Then start with honesty. It's heavier than it looks, but it holds. He smiled faintly. You sound like you're giving another one of your lessons. Maybe I am, I said. They didn't listen. Maybe you will. He left a little after sunset. I watched his taillights disappear down the road and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride that hadn't been wasted. When the night finally settled, I realized I hadn't lost all my family, just the ones who'd chosen to forget what the word meant. There was a last single step. I didn't leave the letter under Diane's door. I took it to her. The morning had that brittle quality old men learn to read. Clear light, cold air that keeps you honest. I drove out to the guest house with a folder under my arm and a pair of house keys in my pocket. Inside the folder were copies of everything. The DNA reports, the photograph, the new will, receipts for the transfers. I had printed a schedule of actions, too, dates and names and times. I had called the mover and the realtor the night before and told them to stand by. This wasn't theater. It was logistics. When I walked up the gravel path, Diane was on the porch with a mug of tea. She wore the same neat cardigan she always wore when she wanted people to think she was harmless. Her smile looked tired. It did not fool me. "Good morning," she said, too light. "You didn't have to—" "I did," I cut in. My voice was calm, but it carried. "We have to settle this now." She set the mug down with a tremor. "Harold, please." "I've already packed a few things. I can go. Let's not make a scene." "It's not about a scene," I said. "It's about time. I'm offering you a window. That's it." I pulled the letter from the folder and held it out. My hand didn't shake. She read it fast, eyes skimming, then going back. The face she made when she realized what I'd written was the closest thing to fear I'd seen from her. "You can't do this," she said finally. "You can't just evict me." "I already did the math, Diane," I said. "The accounts are clear. The locks are almost changed. I spoke to the realtor. The guest house is listed for the 1st of next month unless you leave by then." I let the words land like stones. "Utilities transfer on the 15th. I've arranged a moving company for the 17th. If you are not gone by then, they will load whatever is left." Her mouth opened and closed. She reached for some line about fairness, pity, history. I listened to the rehearsed defenses, the old tricks. None of it altered what I'd done. None of it moved me. "You think I'd leave without a fight?" she asked, trying to make the anger sound like power. "I'm not looking for a fight," I said. "I'm looking for a future." I stepped closer. "You took my truth. You turned my trust into a commodity. I'm taking back what I built. Not out of spite, out of necessity." She swallowed. "You're destroying people." "I'm restoring a life," I said. "Mine." For a second she tried one last thing. She began to cry, that brittle, performative sob that once bent me. I stood still and let it happen. The sound did not reach me. My heart had been trained long ago to keep work and feeling in separate lanes. I would not be derailed. When she dried her face with a tremulous hand, I added the part I'd left until the end. "If you choose to leave before the 17th, I will make arrangements for a modest payout to help you relocate. If you stay, you forfeit that option. The house is my responsibility now. I will not allow it to be used as currency anymore." She looked at me like she'd never seen that part of me, the part that measures consequences and enforces them. "What if I call Greg?" "Call anyone," she whispered. "Then you'll remind them how long you kept the secret and why," I said. "I imagine they'll prefer not to be reminded." She stood there, hands empty. I could see the calculation running through her. I had not given a sermon. I had given deadlines, names, and moved people into motion. It was quieter and harder to fight than shouting. That was deliberate. I left the folder with copies on the kitchen table. I took the keys out and set them on top. "Consider this your notice," I said, "and our last conversation." She tried one last plea. I closed the front door before she could finish it. Outside, the air felt sharp. I walked to my car without looking back. The moving company would call on Monday. The keys in my hand were cool. My hands were steady. I locked the front door behind me and walked toward the edge of the property. The road ahead looked plain and honest, not soft or forgiving. I felt the fight inside me settle into something quieter and more dangerous, a patience turned to purpose. I walked down the lane with the keys in my pocket and a plan in my head, and for the first time in months, I felt like the man who still decided what happened in his life. A few days passed. The house was quiet again. No voices behind closed doors, no footsteps I didn't trust. Just the hum of the heater and the slow rhythm of my own breathing. I made coffee the old way, percolator on the stove, metal spoon clinking against the mug. The air smelled like something honest. Outside, frost covered the garden where Diane's flowers used to grow. I didn't feel regret looking at the empty soil. Emptiness, I'd learned, wasn't loss. It was space waiting for something new. I carried my coffee to the porch and sat down. The boards were cool under my hands, the morning light soft across the yard. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not a call, not an apology, not a lie dressed as comfort. Just the quiet proof that I was still here, and still my own. Thomas would visit on Sunday. We'd talk about his plans, maybe drive to the lake. There was no urgency in it, only continuity. I looked out at the horizon, faint mist rising from the trees, and felt something settle inside me, solid, grounded, calm. The world hadn't changed, but I had, and that was enough. If your legacy was built on deceit, would you tear it down yourself just to make it honest? Share your thoughts in the comments section.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.